Today we're going to patch holes with holes. I know. And why is this a brilliant idea? Because it's totally original. And why is this a terrible idea? Well, we'll get into that. And I'm going to show you how to keep the edges of the holes from fraying and how to make sure that it is sturdy enough for wear and tear in an area that's already worn through. Let's start over at the cutting table. I want to just show you I've got a little piece of lace and a little piece of backing. So first of all, why is this a brilliant idea? Because nobody does it. They don't patch with lace because it's not strong enough. So this second layer, this backing, is what's going to make it strong enough. So I'm just going to put, I'm going to press these both flat, right? So it's always a good idea to start with things really flat. And I've cut them 1/2 inch bigger than the area that I plan to patch. So I'm going to fold that in 1/2 inch and I'm going to steam that down. Okay, and I'll do the same thing on the other side, just folding it in 1/2 inch and steaming it down. And then I'm going to show you on this front side here. Let me just bring a close-up camera in. We're going to keep grabbing the close-up camera when we need it. And there it is. So let me just show you that if you're not paying attention, your little edges are going to stick up. So all you have to do to take care of that, this is called blocking, is you push those down under and then you steam the camera there. Or steam the camera, steam, hello, iron. You take the iron and you use steam on it. So we're just tucking edges under here. And I sometimes use a pin or needle because it gets kind of hot in there. And if you didn't get it far enough in the first time, you push it in again, right? Okay, and we're just going to get this area so that it all lays beautifully before we even attempt to do anything else with it. Okay. I'm going to show you really quick what the project is. So Eileen asked this question because she's been working on this coat she thrifted, and she has a little tear near the hem, which is the area I'm going to show you how to repair. And you can see that the coat is full, the lining is fully sewn in. She also has a repair she needs to do at the shoulder and one that she needs to do in the seam. And here is the lace that she's collected, as well as the backing fabric, because we already exchanged a few emails about this, so she knows she needs her backing fabric. Okay, and hold on just a second. I'm going to take you over to the sewing machine with our little lace that we already got. Where is my sewing machine? There it is. With my lace that we just pressed into shape. And what we're going to do is, just to make this easier, we are going to sew down both of the sides that are not commercially finished. So we're going to not worry too much about finessing all the lace here because it's not going to unravel on those commercially finished edges. But on the edges that we folded over, we're going to be going through 2 layers, the back layer and the front layer, by doing an edge stitch. Now I put some red thread in here so it'll make it easier for you to see. And just come on over here for a sec. We're going to turn our stitch length so it sort of defaults to about 2.5, and we're going to turn it down to like 1.5. This is going to make a much tighter stitch than normal, which is going to make it more secure. It's also going to make the sewing machine want to push that fabric down into the bottom hole a lot more. So I'm going to stabilize it, and especially since, wow, we got some static electricity going on here, especially since lace is not very stable to begin with. So I'm going to use a little paper to stabilize it, and after we sew this, I will cut it off. I'm putting this like an 1/8 inch from the edge, and I'm not worrying quite as much about catching the interior as I am about getting both those layers of lace. Okay, and I'm just going to hold on my 2 threads in the back, and we're going to do a little back tack here to hold it down. And I'm just sewing around the edge. Only in this case, since I have a commercial finish, I'm just doing one side, and then we'll lift it up and we'll just go right over and do the other side. All right, there we go. So if you use a matching color, you're not going to see a bunch of this thread here. And we can clean up our little patch. So this just makes it easier when we're putting in the patch. We don't want a really heavy stitch in case we make mistakes, which especially beginners, that tends to happen. So what we're going to do here is have these layers all sewn in place nice and tight before we put it into the garment. So when we're putting it into the garment, we can use a normal stitch. And if we have to take it out again, it won't be a completely difficult, impossible seam ripping project, which I can handle because seam ripping is my superpower, but which would be a little hard for you. And the stabilizer just, you know, comes off. It just tears off. Maybe not in every single place, and you have to go back in and do a little bit manually, but you know, it's not important. It's all going to be hidden back there. It's not going to do any harm to your project, right? So there we are. We've got a few little threads to snip from when I jumped seams, which by the way is a professional sewing technique, is to go from one seam to another without actually taking your thread out of the machine like I just did. It just sort of speeds your sewing along. All right, so our patch is all ready to go, and I put my ironing board aside, but now we want to prepare our jacket. Okay, so I'm going to take advantage of the fact that this is still open from last time I showed you how to do things on it, and we're just going to press this little bottom area. And one thing that we're going to do, oops, come on, press flat, baby. Because the area that we're going to be working on is so close to the bottom, we are going to take out some of this hem seam. So let me go to my close-up camera. So we're going to take out some of this hem seam because this side seam that's already open is going to give us access to it. So we're going to seam rip in here. This is somewhere that we will be able to come back in with the sewing machine, line those two layers up, and sew it back together pretty easily. And that just allows us to have more access to the area that we're going to be working on here. Okay, so we're going to take our patch and we are going to pin it. I know I'm just going to put it, which way shall I put it? I kind of like it that way. We're going to pin it wherever you want it. And I'm using pins because for this, we are maneuvering a lot of fabric. And I don't necessarily feel like glue stick is going to hold it in place. You know, I love me a glue stitch moment, right? A glue stick moment. This is a little close to that edge, so I'm just changing the direction that I'm pinning it in so that it's not so close to that edge, because the edge will make it a little difficult. I like to get pins near all the corners, right? So we're making sure all this lays flat, and I'm using my hands underneath to pick up both layers so that I don't accidentally go through the front of that coat. So we can make sure it's nice and loose there. And once we have it pinned, we will go back over to the sewing machine. Oops. I think one more pin will do me. I'm going to just put it in this way so that it's going to be easy to grab. All right. So that is all set in there. Let me just... So now we're going to put this under here. And I think the easiest way to come in is, I'm going to just finish ripping this tiny little bit because then it'll be wide open. So there's a tiny bit of the seam. It's going to have to go back together later. And I will show you the machine stitching parts of that. We'll do that together. But if I get this all the way open, it's just going to be so much easier to access. So go ahead and open up as much as you need to of your interior. There we go. Easy access. Okay. I like to start in whatever is going to be the hardest corner so that it gets easier and easier for me. I'm just one of those dessert last people. So I'm sliding this under here, and you can push up on the lever that takes your presser foot up if you need it to get up higher, right? And then I'm going to maneuver it around until everything is pretty much flat. So there we go. And I'm going to the corner where I'm going to start. And I lift up my let me get this out of the way for you. You can only get it so far out of the way because it's all attached, right? I'm going to lift up my presser foot so that I can see where my needle's going in. And once my needle gets right into that corner where that pin is, that's going to be what's holding everything in place. And then I can take my pin out. Okay, so those layers are held in place. I'm now going to hold them flat. And with my fingers, there's always a lot of maneuvering going on here. So I'm going to hold things flat with my fingers. And we're going to sew forward and back tack. And I'm feeling the machine is giving me a little resistance in getting going, and I don't want it to jam up here. So I'm going to wedge the back to encourage it to go forward. And I'm basically going over the stitch I had before, but I've changed here. This is a moment where I'm doing it. Go over and have a look. I've changed back to a normal stitch length, okay? All right, so I'm going to come forward now, pretty much along the stitch line that I was on before. Now this little part here, I don't really want to catch the hem. Oh, did I catch it already? Jeez Louise. I did. No, I didn't. Okay, because we want to get that out of there. And I can see that the pin is going through that hem. That's what's holding it under there. But we don't, because that hem's going to get sewn back down. So we don't want that attached right now. So I'm just loosening that pin that I put in there. Anything that you find that's holding things in a way that doesn't work for you, you just need to change. So it's okay to take pins out midway through. This one's falling out. I'm not quite ready for it to go away though, so I'm pushing that one back in. Now I'm going to turn here, and one thing that's great is where there's a commercial finish, I can, if I have a matching thread, I can just sew along the edge of that commercial finish. So I don't need to be nearly as close to the edge of the fabric here. So I'm just going to pretend it's a matching fabric. I'm going to sew down to this corner. It's always at the corner. We drop that needle in, lift up the presser foot, do our turn, get our fabric beautifully lined up again, and then we go forward to the next turn. Please don't try and do lace on curves when it's your first time doing it. It certainly can be done. Scallops are lovely to go around the edge of, but it is a little bit of a challenge. And so I would guide you away from it at the beginning here. And you notice whenever I get close to my pins, I tend to go to the hand wheel. I lift it up, take my pin out, and then we do the turn and readjust. Okay. And here we just want to make sure everything's going to lay flat. So there seems to be a tiny little tuck in there. Let me see if I can get that out of there. I don't know if you could see that. Whee, at the angle. Nope, I'm still seeing a little tuck underneath my needle. And when I put this down, oh, it's just pushing it from the back. Okay, it's going to be fine then. So we don't want to have a tuck at the very end here. Okay, so we're going to go to the end and then, of course, back tack. All right. Now, let's pull that out. Let's go over and look at that overhead. Good. I think you can see it here. And we're going to take the right side of this little bit of the hem that goes inside our garment. We're going to line up those two previous stitch lines. Let me make it flat so they can face each other right to here. And I'm just going to put a little tiny basting stitch in here to hold it together while I'm stitching it back in place. This is just going to make it so much easier, but I'm not even going to worry about the knot or anything. We're going to pin down this interior lining from the inside. So I'm going inside here. Let me go to the above camera just so you get a good sense of where we are. Just to remind you, we're looking at this lining down here, and I'm basically going inside and grabbing the seam, and there's that little start of the seam that's still in there from before we took it out, and I am re-pinning it so that we can sew this back together. And going right across. Here's our old seam line. Let me get you the close up again. Here's our old seam line there, and everything is lined up along here. And I'm just going to let either side of this seam fall to either side of my pin. All right. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine with that. I want to start out sort of overlapping that previous hemline. There it is. So I'm going to overlap it by about 1 inch instead of doing a back tack. And when I get to my little pin, that's going to be the moment where I take it out. I'm just making sure everything's laying flat in the back. And I'm following the old stitch line, not the crease of the hem, but the old stitch line. I didn't press it specifically so that I could follow this stitch line. If you have a lot of confidence in your sewing, you could press it flat and go with a seam allowance. But I'm basically just sewing it back down in approximately the same place, right up to this edge, and here we will back tack. There we go. So let me just show you where we are again in space. So this is the seam that we just put back in place. And instead of doing, whoops, go away pocket. Instead of doing this entire seam by hand, I'm going to actually sew up about halfway, about as far as I can get before it becomes difficult to sew. So I'm going to turn this little area inside out so that we've got the right sides of the lining facing each other again. So just putting pins in over here and there. Oh, I think I can get all the way up to here before my luck runs out, and it gets really cumbersome to sew straight and flat. I'm going to pin up to here. Yeah, and then I just really start straining on the fabric. So at least halfway along here. All right, let's go to the sewing machine. And pull out. So my little corner pin kind of ran away. Now, in terms of getting the fabric to lay flat, it is very much pulling in the other direction, so I'm really focusing just on the forward part here, but I have made sure I don't have any pinched fabric at the very end of this seam. And I'm not sewing very precisely. This is the lining of the coat. I'm not too worried about it. You could actually be a little generous with your seam allowance and err on the side of encompassing more rather than less, but you can also, you're going to be ironing or pressing this when you get it done to make it look nice, so that helps compensate for anything that is a little wonky. Wonky. Alrighty, so ooh, there we go. And when I get as far as I can go, and I'm almost there, I'm feeling that bottom layer sort of really pulling away and wanting to buckle up under me. So when I get as far as I can go, and when I take a pin out, I just use my fingers as the pins. They actually have a lot more control than the pins do. And let's go to the overhead and see what I just did. Okay, so now we're just going to turn, we're going to shove our coat back into that lining. There we go, look at that. All right. How fun. Okay, and so now the hand stitch part that's left is not that long. And I'm just going to give you like a little refresher so you don't have to go back to my other video to learn how to do the ladder stitch. So let's get this where we can see it, and I'm going to use my red thread to show you. So again, to start my hand work, I always like to go somewhere on the interior of the fabric where it won't be seen, and come up and grab a little bite. Obviously this thread's not long enough, but I'm only going to show you 1 or 2 stitches. You see, keep going in the same vein. So I make a little knot here, Oftentimes you can do this even more to the interior side just to hide it more, but I'm trying to make it really visible for you. And then you go right across from that knot. So not forward like I was just doing, but right across from that knot. Whoops. Let's see, can you see that? Yeah. And the more right across you go, the more invisible your stitch is going to be. And then I'm going to take kind of a big stitch again, just so that it's easy for you to see. And I went under the fabric there. And then I'm going to go into this little tunnel here. And I'm basically going to go up another long little bite. And this is directly across from where that last stitch came out. And then I'm going in directly across from where that just came out. So this is the hand stitch. You go all the way to the other end with it. And then you will put the same kind of knot in that you did in the beginning. I'm just going to pretend we're at the end here to make it interesting for you. Okay, and we will put the same little knot. I'm going to be a little more careful about getting it to the back side this time. And we go through the loop of the thread. Let me get that nice and tight before that knot locks it down. So the tighter I pull this, the less those stitches show down there. Right, so that's all nice and tight before I lock that down. And then after I've done 2 of those, I'll take my tail up to the underside where we can't see it and snip it off. So that's what your hand stitch all the way up the outer lining will look like. All right, so tackling that little shoulder area, what I suggest you do is open up the seam next to it and that you go in by hand. So you've already made your patch and stitched the patch backing to the lace, and you go in by hand and just loosely stitch it around with one layer of your hand between the lining and the jacket so that you don't sew through all the way through to the jacket, and then mend the little area that you had to open up for that by hand. So it's like a little more complicated project, I think, than the pocket one in some ways. All right, good luck with it. Let me know how it turns out and hit me up with other questions along the way. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'm actually going to end things here.